Have you ever wondered how people in the Middle Ages managed their personal hygiene? It's a question that might lead some to imagine a time of filth and stench, but let's challenge that assumption today. You see, the notion that people of the Middle Ages were unhygienic is a common misconception. This mistaken belief is largely due to the fact that modern standards of cleanliness are drastically different from those of the past. We've grown accustomed to daily showers, deodorants, and the luxury of indoor plumbing. These conveniences were not available during the Middle Ages, thus leading many to presume that our ancestors must have been quite the stinky bunch. Yet the reality is quite the contrary. There's ample evidence that suggests people in the Middle Ages cared deeply about cleanliness. For instance, they had a fundamental understanding of the link between cleanliness and health. While their methods differed from ours, they did strive to maintain hygiene. One of the reasons this misconception persists is due to the limited availability of personal hygiene items from archaeological excavations. The Middle Ages was a time before plastic and other non-biodegradable materials. Many items used for personal hygiene were made of wood, bone, or other organic materials. Over the centuries, these materials have decomposed, leaving few traces for us to find today. Despite this, we've still found evidence of combs, toothpicks, and even early forms of toothpaste. There are also written records and illustrations depicting people bathing, grooming, and taking care of their appearance. These sources reveal a society that valued cleanliness, contradicting the popular belief of a dirty and unhygienic Middle Ages. So as we can see, the idea that people in the Middle Ages were unhygienic is a myth. As we delve deeper into the topic, we'll uncover more about the fascinating and complex ways our ancestors navigated the world of hygiene. So stick around, and let's debunk some more misconceptions together. Now, let's take a step back to the early Middle Ages, a period heavily influenced by Roman culture. As we delve into the early Middle Ages, we find a society still clinging to the remnants of Roman civilization, and this is especially evident in their hygiene practices. The Romans were renowned for their advanced understanding of hygiene and sanitation, with their grand aqueducts, public baths, and complex sewage systems. Public baths, or thermae as they were known, were a cornerstone of Roman society. They were more than just a place to get clean. They were social hubs, places to conduct business, and even sites for religious ritual. These baths were heated by a system called hypocaust, a clever invention that circulated hot air under the floor and through the walls. But as we move further into the Middle Ages, we see a shift. The grandeur of the Roman bathhouses began to decline. This wasn't due to a sudden aversion to cleanliness, but rather a combination of socio-political changes and practical concerns. The upkeep of these large, complex structures was expensive and labor-intensive. As the Roman Empire crumbled, so too did its infrastructure, including its baths and sewage systems. Moreover, the rise of Christianity brought with it new attitudes towards the body and cleanliness. The Church often associated bathing with vanity and excess, discouraging frequent visits to the baths. And so, the once bustling bathhouses fell into disrepair, and public bathing became less common. That's not to say that people stopped bathing altogether. Many would still wash at home, albeit less frequently, and less thoroughly than in the Roman times. But without the communal aspect and the infrastructure, the comprehensive hygiene practices of the Romans fell by the wayside. The fall of the Roman Empire marked a significant decline in public hygiene practices. And as we'll see in the next segment, the Church would play a significant role in shaping attitudes towards hygiene in the Middle Ages. In the absence of Roman influence, the Church began to shape hygiene practices in the Middle Ages. With the fall of the Roman Empire, the Church emerged as a powerful institution, and its views on cleanliness deeply impacted societal norms and practices. The Church's influence ushered in a shift from public to private bathing. In the Roman era, bathhouses were social hubs, where citizens would gather to bathe, socialize, and conduct business. However, the Church viewed these public bathing practices with suspicion, associating them with immorality and excess. To promote modesty and chastity, the Church encouraged private bathing. This shift had profound implications, as the communal nature of Roman bathhouses had facilitated regular bathing. With the decline of public bathhouses, personal hygiene practices also dwindled. The Church's teachings also emphasized spiritual rather than physical cleanliness. Cleanliness of the soul took precedence over cleanliness of the body. The Church propagated the belief that the pursuit of physical cleanliness was a sign of vanity, a distraction from one's spiritual duties. Bathing was seen as a luxury, not a necessity. This perspective led to a lack of emphasis on physical hygiene, contributing to an overall decline in cleanliness during the Middle Ages. Monastic communities, however, were an exception to this trend. Monks and nuns were required to bathe regularly, though the frequency varied across different orders and regions. The church mandated cleanliness within these religious communities, recognizing the link between cleanliness and health. For instance, the Rule of Saint Benedict, a guide for monastic life, instructed monks to bathe regularly and keep their living quarters clean. Despite these pockets of cleanliness, the church's overall stance on hygiene had a significant impact on societal practices during the Middle Ages. The shift from public to private bathing and the de-emphasis on physical cleanliness contributed to a decline in hygiene standards. Yet, the church's influence was not entirely negative. The hygiene practices within monastic communities showed an understanding of the importance of cleanliness, providing a glimmer of the hygiene standards that would re-emerge in later centuries. The church played a significant role in shaping hygiene practices during the Middle Ages. The arrival of the Black Death in the 14th century brought about a dramatic shift in hygiene practices. As the plague swept across Europe, claiming the lives of millions, the connection between cleanliness and health became glaringly apparent. Before this, hygiene had often been overlooked, considered a luxury rather than a necessity. But when the Black Death reared its ugly head, everything changed. The plague was indiscriminate, striking down both the wealthy and the poor. It wasn't long before people began to notice that those who lived in filth were more likely to succumb to the disease. This realization led to an increased emphasis on cleanliness as a means of disease prevention. The concept of quarantine was born out of desperation during these trying times. The word itself comes from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days, which was the period ships were required to be isolated before passengers and crew could go ashore during the Black Death. This practice was one of the earliest forms of infection control, predating the germ theory of disease by several centuries. The Black Death also led to more organized waste disposal systems. Before the plague, waste was often dumped in the streets, leading to a filthy and disease-ridden environment. But with the terror of the plague still fresh in their minds, people started to take waste disposal more seriously. Towns started employing rakers to remove the waste from the streets and dispose of it properly. The plague also influenced personal hygiene practices. People began to wash their hands more frequently, bathe more regularly, and pay greater attention to their dental hygiene. Cleanliness was no longer seen as just a matter of comfort or social status, but as a matter of life and death. In a strange twist of fate, the Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, led to significant advances in public health and hygiene. It forced people to rethink their attitudes towards cleanliness and disease prevention, leading to practices and concepts that are still in use today. The Black Death was a turning point in the history of hygiene, highlighting the importance of cleanliness in disease prevention. The Renaissance period brought about a resurgence of interest in personal hygiene. This era, spanning from the 14th to the 17th centuries, was characterized by a renewed fascination with the knowledge and philosophies of the classical world. And with this revival came a re-evaluation of the importance of cleanliness. In the heart of this period we see the return of public baths. These establishments, seen as a hallmark of Roman civilization, had fallen out of favor during the earlier Middle Ages. However, the Renaissance saw them make a comeback. The baths weren't just places for physical cleaning, they were also social hubs, where people of all classes could gather, gossip, and relax. The Renaissance also saw the development of early plumbing systems. Cities began to adopt intricate networks of pipes and sewers, inspired by the ancient Roman aqueducts. This allowed for more efficient waste disposal and helped to improve the overall cleanliness of urban areas. But perhaps one of the most significant advancements during this time was the production of soap. While soap had been known since antiquity, its production was revolutionized in the Renaissance. The soap-making process became more refined and efficient, and soap became more widely available. The importance of washing with soap was emphasized, marking a shift towards a more modern understanding of hygiene. However, it's worth noting that these practices were not universally adopted. Many people, particularly in rural areas, still relied on old methods of cleaning. It was a time of transition, and change did not happen overnight. Yet the influence of the Renaissance on hygiene can't be understated. It ushered in a new era of cleanliness, a stark contrast to the previous centuries. This period marked a shift in attitudes towards personal hygiene, paving the way for the practices we are familiar with today. The Renaissance period marked a return to an emphasis on physical cleanliness. This shift reflected a broader cultural change, a renewed appreciation for the human body, and a desire to care for it in all aspects, including cleanliness. So what can we learn from the evolution of hygiene practices during the Middle Ages? First off, it's essential to debunk the common misconception that everyone during the Middle Ages was filthy. While it's true that certain practices may seem unhygienic by today's standards, it's crucial to remember that the concept of hygiene has evolved over time. In the early Middle Ages, the remaining Roman influence played a significant role in shaping people's understanding of cleanliness. Bathing was common, and public bathhouses were social hubs, showing us that cleanliness wasn't a foreign concept to our ancestors. Moving on, the Church's influence in the Middle Ages cannot be overlooked. While it's easy to assume that the Church's focus on spiritual purity might have overshadowed physical cleanliness, the reality is more nuanced. The Church did not discourage bathing or cleanliness per se. Instead, it cautioned against excess, vanity, and the potential moral pitfalls associated with public bathhouses. So, the Church's impact on hygiene was both profound and complex. The Black Death, one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, also played a significant role in shaping hygiene practices. The disease's rampant spread led to a heightened awareness of cleanliness and disease prevention. It spurred the development of quarantine measures, a concept we're all too familiar with today, and led to a re-evaluation of public health practices. Finally, let's revisit the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance period. The rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts during the Renaissance led to a renewed interest in personal hygiene and public health. This period saw a resurgence in the use of public bathhouses and a greater emphasis on cleanliness, setting the stage for modern hygiene practices. So, while it's easy to dismiss the Middle Ages as a time of dirt and disease, the reality is far more nuanced. The period was one of both challenges and innovations in the field of hygiene, providing us with a rich history of cleanliness and disease prevention. While hygiene practices have evolved significantly since the Middle Ages, the period provides valuable insights into the history of cleanliness and disease prevention. From the Roman baths to the Church's emphasis on spiritual cleanliness, hygiene in the Middle Ages was a complex and evolving concept. The journey through the Middle Ages has shown us just how nuanced the concept of cleanliness was during this period. The Romans' advanced sanitation practices contrasted sharply with the Church's focus on spiritual rather than physical cleanliness. The devastating impact of the Black Death led to a deeper understanding of the importance of hygiene, paving the way for the Renaissance's renewed focus on physical cleanliness. Understanding the past gives us a broader perspective, enlightening us on the importance of hygiene practices that we often take for granted today. The evolution of these practices has shaped our modern standards of cleanliness and health. The Middle Ages offer a fascinating case study in this evolution, highlighting the crucial role of societal and cultural shifts in shaping our understanding of hygiene. In understanding the past, we can better appreciate the evolution of hygiene practices and their role in our daily lives today.